there were a couple of times when I approached the Prime Minister. The last time was when the statue of my father was erected in Delhi, and I was invited for the unveiling of the statue. And I had agreed to come if I would get an appointment with the Prime Minister to discuss the question of the returns of the remains. And to that, there was no answer. And
There
I also
literally
had, by
was
the way,
no answer.
not only Prime Minister Modi, I had also written to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and his office also did not return. So no answer is also an answer.
So, two prime ministers, the present Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, and his predecessor, Dr. Manmohan Singh, both of them were people you approached and neither bothered to answer.
That's right.
Can I ask you, how many times have you written to the present Prime Minister?
At least twice, I think, thrice.
At least twice or thrice.
Yeah.
And you've had no reply to any of those letters.
Yes, and by the way, I also approached the present president for an appointment, and that was I got an answer to that was turned down.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Yesterday, the 23rd of January, was Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose's 129th birthday, and on that occasion, his daughter Anita Bose Pfaff released a video statement asking the Indian people to support the return to India of her father's mortal remains. It's over 80 years since Netaji's death on the 18th of August 1945, and it's 78 years since India got independence, yet Netaji's mortal remains remain in Japan, or as his daughter puts it, an exile from India, the country he loved. In a moment, I shall play a brief excerpt of Anita Bose Pfaff's message, and after that, I shall speak to her about the efforts she has made in the past and is now making once again to bring her father's remains to India.
As Netaji's daughter, I invite the Indians of today who still revere him, respect him, and love him to support his posthumous return from exile, to support the transfer of his mortal remains to India for a final and fitting disposal. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Professor Pfaff, yesterday on the 23rd of January, you released a video message to the Indian people to mark the 129th birth anniversary of your father, Netaji, and in that message you called upon the Indian people to support your wish to bring back his mortal remains from Japan to India. It's over 80 years since Netaji died. 8 decades have gone by. Can you start by explaining why his remains have not been brought back to India earlier? Why is it that 80 years after he's died, his mortal remains still are outside the country?
In order to understand that, we have to consider how times have changed. When my father passed away on the 18th of August 1945, that was just the end of the Second World War in the Eastern Theater of War. And things must have been in total upheaval. And of course, on top of that, communications were not as efficient as they are today. If we had today's technology, there would have been several people with cell phones taking pictures of the plane crash and the fire and the injured. But nowadays, of course, information is fast, and at that time it took much longer to get around. For example, my mother only learned 4 or 5 days after the plane crash via a radio announcement that he had passed away. And everything was very uncertain. The Japanese were getting out of what was then what is Taiwan today, and was which they had occupied at the time, and so rumors got around, and speculations, and we can be sure that the British were most motivated to find out whether indeed he had died. And there was an investigation by the Americans on behalf of the British, and there were some other investigations also around the 1945, 1946. But the results of these were sort of kept confidential. And so by the time India had the first investigation into his death in 1956, these had not been published. And over the years, there were 11 investigations into my father's death, and 10 came to the conclusion that he died at the time. But since there was a lot of time available, there was also time to speculate, and there were some factors which contributed to the idea that once again my father might have had a miraculous escape from a difficult situation, as had happened before. Under these circumstances, I think no government was willing to touch the issue of bringing back my father's remains, because for the politicians it was a controversial issue. There might have been some who had welcomed it, but there were others who said, no, Netaji did not die. These are not his remains. Throw them out. We don't want them. This is just a forgery, and so on. And the one government that wanted to tackle the problem was Narasimha Rao's government. But before it was possible to bring back the remains at the time, the government fell, and the next government was not willing to continue with the issue. So we have been waiting around for a long time.
In the video that you put out, which I referred to in my introduction, you said the one thing your father feared most of all was exile. Isn't it a paradox that 78 years have passed since India got independence, and yet his remains effectively remain in exile? How would he have viewed the fact that 70 years after India got independence, his remains still have not come back to the country he loved?
I think he would be. We can, of course, only speculate. I think he would have been very upset about it. But of course, there was another aspect of independence which would have been very distressing to him, and that was the partition. So I think, on the one hand, he certainly would have wanted to come back to his country, India, but not necessarily a country divided, and even not only divided, but a lot of the time at war with each other. So
tell me, you're Netaji's daughter, you're Netaji's heir. Why can't you simply collect his ashes from the Renkoji temple in Tokyo, where they have lain all these years, and bring them to India yourself? What prevents you doing that?
There are mainly two aspects which make it difficult. My father was not only a private person. He was not only my father. He was not only a member of the Bose family. He considered himself Indian. He was a son of India. So in a way, it would be up to the government to bring back somebody who had been the first the president in exile of India, and welcome him. This would have been a respect towards him, but also towards Japan, because Japan has kept his remains for a long time, and I'm greatly indebted to the country and to particularly, of course, to the priests of the temple that they did agree to keep his remains. But if I went there and insisted on getting the remains and bringing them to India, possibly they would feel obliged to pass them on to me, and I imagine I could bring them back in some way or the other. But consider that in the relationship of the two countries, it would be a sign of mistrust and disrespect if the Indian government did not get involved in such a matter. And then a more mundane aspect, imagine if I brought back, say, the remains on a plane and entered the country, and this was known. There would be many people coming to welcome the remains. There would be others to protest. It would be a possible source of great danger and unrest. I mean, if you have many examples of mass movements where hundreds and thousands of people get killed because there's no control. So my father's return would have to be a public and also a secure form of entry into the country.
So, if I understand you properly, for diplomatic reasons and political reasons, but also for simply logistical reasons,
Yeah.
you believe a request should be made by the Indian government to the Japanese government to transfer the remains to India, and that request by the Indian government has never been made.
I think it had been, the discussions had started under Narasimha Rao's government. At that time, Pranab Mukherjee, the later Rashtrapati, was foreign minister, and I think he made negotiations at the time. But it never got to the point where this at least became public. I think one speculation was that the remains could be brought by a Japanese warship and handed over to an Indian warship or other more sort of official forms of return.
Now, in an interview that he gave me last year, Ashish Ray has told me that in earlier years you've written to Prime Minister Modi to secure his help bringing back Netaji's mortal remains to India. But not only have you not got a response to your letters to Mr. Modi, you haven't got an acknowledgement either. Tell me about that.
There were a couple of times when I approached the Prime Minister. The last time was when the statue of my father was erected in Delhi, and I was invited for the unveiling of the statue, and I had agreed to come if I would get an appointment with the Prime Minister to discuss the question of the returns of the remains, and to that there was no answer. And I also had, by the way, not only Prime Minister Modi, I had also written to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and his office also did not return. So no answer is also an answer.
So two prime ministers, the present Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, and his predecessor, Dr. Manmohan Singh, both of them were people you approached and neither bothered to answer.
That's right.
Can I ask you, how many times have you written to the present Prime Minister?
At least twice, I think, thrice.
At least twice or thrice?
Yeah.
And you've had no reply to any of those letters?
Yes, and by the way, I also approached the present president for an appointment, and that was I got an answer to that was turned down.
The present president turned down the request for an appointment.
Yeah.
This is President Murmu.
It was said I had requested a specific date, and of course it was worded more politely and said was not possible. But I mean, if there had been an interest in having the presidents meeting me, they would have suggested another date or something. But I think the government does not want to touch the issue.
Tell me, you've appealed to the Indian people for their support bringing back your father's remains. Would you consider approaching the Prime Minister a fourth time, or do you think it's pointless to do so?
No, I certainly will. Of course, there were other reasons. Of course, I had thought of approaching him about an appointment this winter, but my husband was very sick, so I was unable to travel anyway. But I certainly will do that. But I can understand, of course, that the prime minister is a very busy person, and ultimately, the problems of today are the things that have to keep him busy.
Except that it's not an ordinary person writing to him, it's Netaji's daughter. And remember, Netaji is the leader whose statue he erected in India Gate. He put it up deliberately and consciously in a place where once King George's statue used to be. If Netaji's daughter were to write to request an appointment to seek his support and help bringing back her father's remains, surely at least an acknowledgement is expected, even if he doesn't agree to the appointment. But you didn't even get an acknowledgement.
That's right.
Why do you think this government, and I'm talking specifically about the Modi government, which has been in power for 11 years, is reluctant to help bring back Netaji's ashes? Is it for political reasons? Is it because Netaji is a hero in Bengal and Mamata Banerjee is in power in Bengal?
I certainly think that political issues come into the picture because uh, a politician will do things that do not harm him, that do not jeopardize his elections. And even though there are many issues that keep the public and the politicians occupied, uh, this is an emotional issue which might, in fact, um, antagonize some people, both in his own party and also, of course, in the public at large. So I think a politician can be expected to do something if he is fairly certain that it would benefit him. And I think I quite accept that Prime Minister Modi probably respects my father and wants to honor him and all that. But he would at the same time not do something which he would find controversial. And I think by now most people have accepted that my father did die at the time. But some years ago or some decades ago, there were quite a few who were, also in my own family, I must add, who were violently opposed to the idea that these are his remains and that they should be returned to India.
Let me once again touch on that apparent contradiction I mentioned a moment ago. Not so long ago, the Prime Minister deliberately and consciously chose to install a statue of Netaji at India Gate. India Gate is perhaps the most prized location for a statue, and he installed it under a canopy where once King George, the King Emperor as he was at the time, had stood. And yet, when you write to him to ask for his help to bring back Netaji's ashes, you don't even get an acknowledgement. Leave aside a reply, you don't even get an acknowledgement. Isn't that a contradiction?
No, I don't think it is, because I think it's understandable that many of the things that my father did and stood for are enough cause for honoring him. And of course, it's possibly also a negative side that it was a possible slight to the Nehru Gandhi dynasty to put up his statue in this very prominent place, because one might have also said this is the place where Mahatma Gandhi's statue ought to be put up. But on the other hand, Prime Minister Modi was the one prime minister who has never been to Renkochi Temple when he was in Japan. And he was in Japan several times as a chief minister and later on as a prime minister. And he was the one who never went to Renkochi, starting with
Can I
Pandit
interrupt and ask?
Nehru.
Can I interrupt and ask, have all other prime ministers, when they've gone to Japan, been to the Renkoji temple to, in a sense, pay their respects to Netaji's mortal remains? Is Mr. Modi the first and only prime minister
As
not to do
far
it?
as I'm not certain, but from what I've heard, Manmohan Singh also did not go. But all the other prime ministers, I think, when they went to Japan, they also went to Renkochi Temple.
Tell me this. You've written 3 times to Prime Minister Modi. You've asked an appointment, you've got no response. Are you disillusioned?
No, because I'm an old woman, and at least I have been a keen observer of politics long enough that it doesn't surprise me as a political statement. I agree with you that it seems to be a contradiction that there are several aspects, not only the statue, but also renaming Andaman and Nicobar Islands and so on. There were several ways of honoring my father under the Modi government. But
But he doesn't want to meet Netaji's daughter.
I'm not an important person. So and if he meets me,
Can you imagine the Prime Minister refusing to meet Mahatma Gandhi's sons? Were they alive? Here's
well,
the Prime Minister refusing to meet Netaji's daughter. She's written to him 3 times, and as I keep repeating, you haven't even got an acknowledgement, leave aside a reply, and all you wanted to do was to discuss how to bring back to India your father's remains.
I think that was the main reason why I probably didn't get a reply. Maybe if I had written to him, could I call on you without mentioning what it was about? I might have gotten a reply. Who knows?
So it's the political impact or consequences of helping to bring back your father's remains that Mr. Modi, you believe, is avoiding.
I suspect that there are some people in his own environment who do not like the idea of the remains being brought back, because maybe for a long time they had sort of maintained that these are not his remains. And of course, most people do not like to admit that they have made a mistake. So it's safer to sort of try to keep the issue at bay.
Finally, Professor Pfaff, you've appealed to the Indian people for their support. What would you like them to do?
I think there are many different aspects that could be done. First of all, admitting openly to the fact that Netaji's remains are still in Japan and that these are his remains. And then, of course, there are different things one could write to politicians. One could make petitions, and any number of ways to express the idea that we want Netaji back.
In other words, you'd like the Indian people to make it clear to Indian politicians that they want Netaji's remains brought back. They can do this by writing letters, by petitions, by writing directly to the Prime Minister, but you'd like them to make that effort.
I would very much welcome that, and not only the Prime Minister, but maybe also other politicians who have the Prime Minister's ear.
Absolutely. And perhaps they could also write to the Prime Minister and to the President to say, next time Netaji's daughter wants to meet you, please meet her. It's the least you can do to Netaji's memory.
Thank you.
Professor Pfaff, thank you very much for the time you've given me. The story you've had to tell me is one that will shake and surprise many Indians. They would find it hard to believe, and yet it is the truth, that the Prime Minister of India, someone who respects Netaji, who has put up his statue at India Gate of all places, has been approached 3 times by you for a meeting and has not even acknowledged the letter, leave aside, respond to it. That would be hard to believe. And it's also equally hard to accept that the president of the country, the present serving president, was asked for an appointment and was unwilling to meet you. But those are the facts of the matter, and those are the truths that we have to face and confront. I thank you for the time you've given me. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.